Round 16 for the AFL 2023 season is in the books and was interesting to say the least. Join me today as we unpack the round that was round 16 before looking ahead and getting our tips locked in for round 17. Sit back, relax, let's get this one underway. Before we get into round 16 and the recap, I think it's important to touch on the fact that John Ralph has broken some news that the AFL is looking to implement a mid-season trade period for 2024 and beyond. We're actually talking 12 months from now, we could have players traded mid-year to different clubs, and that is going to happen alongside the mid-season draft. And the mid-season draft is one that we've seen over recent years be incredibly fruitful when it comes to delivering players, and players of all different calibers, but players that have been able to come into the AFL system and have immediate impact. John Noble from Collingwood, Marlon Pickett from Richmond. Most recently, we had Ryan Marich go to West Coast and within a 10-day span went from playing at VFL level and waffle level to playing an AFL game. And he's not the only mid-season draftee we have seen debut this year. So I think the mid-season draft has been incredibly handy, and it gives opportunity to players that might have missed in the national draft or the rookie draft, and it's given them a second lease on life. With this trade period, a lot of people aren't looking at this logically. A lot of people are now saying that, there's going to be teams that are going to be tanking deliberately so they can trade off, early first round picks to try and get some talent in. Some of the top tier teams are going to be looking at trying to bolster their stocks through the season and nitpick from the lower teams to make their teams stronger. I think there's going to be contingencies put into place to stop that from happening, because we don't want, something like a mid-season trade period to turn into a laughingstock and to further degrade the competition, because the competition this year, I feel, as a collective, has taken a huge step backwards, and we need to find something that's going to make us a little bit more reputable. We need something that needs to get us back on a level that all supporters are happy with, that everybody's happy to take in, because the brand we're watching right now, I feel, is a little bit tainted with all these rule changes and inconsistencies with umpiring and the MRO, spinning the wheel and whatever the case may be. But I think a mid-season trade period serves just like a mid-season draft period would. It gives opportunity for teams that are struggling to be able to bring some talent in that could potentially help them long term. Now, whether this trade period only allows them to sign players for, X amount of months or whatever the case may be, the immediate team we think of is West Coast, and West Coast is struggling. They've gone through, I think they said on the weekend, over 40 different players have lined up for West Coast this year. And I think a list maybe only has 45 odd players on it, so you do the math. This allows a team like West Coast to go to clubs like a Collingwood, like a Richmond, like a Melbourne, like a Brisbane, like a Port Adelaide. These clubs that have their 23 set in stone, but also their interchange and the players that are in the mix. You're going to have some players at some clubs that are finding it a little bit too hard to break into that mix, that might want opportunity elsewhere. And when West Coast is struggling to field a team, and you've got players at another club that are struggling to break in, it almost seems like a match made in heaven. So I think this is one to watch very closely, because I think it has opportunity to really turn the game on its head and take the AFL to a whole new level, if it's done correctly. But round 16 kicked off at the Gabba with Brisbane hosting Richmond, and I tipped Richmond by 13 points, and fuck was I wrong, because if you want to have a little bit of an insight as to kind of how my night went down, it went down like this.
The fuck? Bullshit! The whole score is from fucking match fixing. Oh, what a load of bullshit. I just robbed us a goal right in front of... Gonna rob us another goal. How is that not a free kick to McIntosh? He just got fucking jumper punched. That should be a fucking suspension as well. Or what is this fucking bullshit? Or that is some fucking bullshit. That isn't fucking 15. More fucking match fixing. Fuck this fucking shit.
Early on, it was an arm wrestle in the first quarter, and I thought we were going to have a really good game on our hands. And then Brisbane kicked a goal. And then they kicked another goal. And then they kicked another goal. And then Jaden Short did his hamstring. And then they kicked another goal. And then they kicked a fuckload more goals. And then Noah Cumberland did an ankle at half time. And I thought, fuck, it couldn't get any worse, could it? And it did. It just got so worse. It is the worst game of football I've seen Richmond play in recent years. I think we have to go back to almost 2015, 2016 to think of how poorly they played. And this was very disappointing considering the month of football we have seen Richmond play. They only lost to Port Adelaide at the MCG by 10 points, albeit an inaccurate Port Adelaide, but still. And then they've had some really good gutsy wins, and I thought this was a game we really could have won. And obviously, I've spoken to some people on Twitter during the week and stuff like that, and when I do these videos, I do them before teams are announced, so I don't know who's playing, who's not playing. So when I tipped Richmond, I didn't know Dion Prestia was going to be out. Obviously, Dustin Martin was a late withdrawal. We couldn't have anticipated Jaden Short doing a hamstring, but I don't think Richmond are a 12-plus goal worse side than Brisbane, because we have seen both of these teams at full capacity have some absolutely blockbuster contests in recent years. We were beaten in the midfield soundly, and Prestia and Martin's, omission from the team through injury really hurt us severely, but let's not understate how well Brisbane played. I mean, Brisbane played at the Gabba, and they owned the Gabba. They're bullying every single team that comes there, but now the question remains, are they flat track bullies, or are they genuine contenders? Are they going to continue to dominate at the Gabba and then come to the MCG where, the premierships are won and struggle? Or is this all building and culminating to something much bigger? Because let's not forget, Brisbane were my prediction at the start of the year to not only finish first on the ladder, but to win the premiership overall. So if that is to come to fruition, they need to start learning that this game style that they're playing at the Gabba needs to transition down here. On the flip side of things, when I look at Richmond, I support my team through thick and thin. I've been through some very fucking hard times with these boys, as a lot of Richmond supporters have. I'm not one of these fair weather supporters that have jumped on board during the premiership eras. I've been in the crowds and cried, and those tears have been tears of joy and tears of sadness. I remember back in 2017 when we won our grand final, we got smacked by St Kilda. So, teams are going to be off some days. And as hard as it was to watch, I think it's a learning curve for a lot of Richmond players, especially the young kids we're playing. And with heartache comes opportunity, because when we get into the tipping later on, there's some good news coming out of Tigerland that I'm very excited to talk about. Sydney hosted Geelong at the SCG, and I tipped Geelong to win this game on the basis that Sydney kicking 200 plus points against West Coast the week before, I felt could be in a situation where they were going to get a little bit shell-shocked, because they've gone from essentially what was going to be a training drill to a game where a genuine contender was going to give them a run for their money. This was a game that Sydney should have won quite comfortably by 5, 6, even 7 goals. And it ended in a draw. The draw was great for people supporting clubs like Richmond, like Carlton, like Fremantle, those teams that are still thereabouts and only, a win or two out of the top 8 conversation. But it was so hard to watch this game play out, especially when you've had shots on goal like Tom Hickey, 10 metres out, barely any angle, shanks the ball like any ruckman would. Robbie Fox runs into an open goal with about 2 minutes left on the clock, even that, and hits the goal post. Sydney had some real opportunities to really put the foot down and run away with this game, more so than what Geelong had. And it almost in the end felt like a game that neither club deserved to win, because they were neither playing to the standard that we're used to seeing from these guys. This is the team that played in the grand final last year. And while you can take a lot out of this, draw as a Sydney fan, because Geelong belted Sydney at the start of the season, to think these are the teams that played well enough to make a grand final, but struggled to be accurate in front of goal, yeah. I think this game is best left where it is, and we'll just move on. Adelaide hosted North Melbourne at Adelaide Oval. I tipped Adelaide. I said convincingly they should win this game by, 8 goals. And they won quite convincingly in the end. After a start that I actually was a little bit worried about. At one point I saw just before halftime, Adelaide were only maybe 8 or 9 points clear, and I thought North Melbourne have come to play. They're giving it a red hot shake, and North Melbourne in many scenarios this year, even when they've been convincingly beaten, their players really stand up and are still giving their all, especially the young kids. I think where it's breaking down for North Melbourne is their defensive six aren't living up to the expectation that the rest of the team are setting. And if you watch some of North Melbourne's game in isolation, moving the ball out of their back half was atrocious. They were missing short passes, they were kicking it out on the full, they were just, banging it long and turning it over to Adelaide. And when you've got young kids coming through the midfield and, other players like Simpkin, like LDU, all coming through, trying to have impact and bring the ball forward, and then when you get it forward, you got players like Curtis, you've got Stephenson, you've got Larkey that are all hitting the scoreboard. To break down defensively and let the rest of the team down, I feel North Melbourne are in a position here where even though some of the players in their defensive structure have been there for a very long time, North Melbourne need to start looking towards the future. And if that means some of these players that are much older but are underperforming need to be benched for the time being, I think that really needs to happen. Flip side of things, Adelaide, again, I've said it all season, they have been my prediction since the start of the year to be the big improvers, and I still think they firm as the dark horse for finals. They're playing some good footy, and when they get the ball rolling, even though it took them a little bit to get it on their terms, they can get it rocking. I mean, Isaac Rankin kicks 5 goals. Tex Walker ends up with 4 after a very quiet start. To have players like that quiet for so long, but then still able to kick a big bag when it counted, they've got some real potency in that forward line. And when you look on paper at every single aspect on the field for Adelaide, they have strength everywhere. There is not one place where you can look definitively and say, there is a massive gap. They're proving a lot of people wrong this year, and I think I've said it, and I'll say it again. I've already said it in this fucking video. Keep an eye on them, because if they make it to September, they're going to do some damage. Western Bulldogs hosted Fremantle at Marvel Stadium, and as Bevo would fucking go off about on fucking Facebook, he'd probably be sitting there going, yippity-doo-dah, fucking doggies, that bastard. He's probably gone off his rocker, because the doggies got up and won a really good game. And this was a game that I felt early on the Bulldogs were going to run away with in a big way early. I thought Fremantle were going to get blown out of the water, and I mean, in the end, they still lost by 29, 30 odd points, but I thought this was really staring down the barrel of a 10 plus goal win. Just the jump the Bulldogs got, and around the ground, they just looked so much better and much more efficient. But then Michael Walters found a way to kick a couple of goals, and Jai Amos stepped up and kicked a few goals. And then they started really turning it into an arm wrestle of a game. But then again, as the Bulldogs have managed to do in most of their games this year when they have gotten over the line, they stand up when it counts. And their last quarter performance was again something to marvel. And it wasn't just the usual, cohort of Bulldogs getting the job done. It wasn't just English, Bontempelli, it wasn't just McRae, it wasn't just Liberatore, who I still feel is one of the most underrated midfielders in the competition. But Yamara Ugle-Hagan really came into his own in this game. Bailey Dale has had some games where he's dropped off a little bit, but he played out of his skin in this game. Even youngsters like O'Donnell, who's only played a handful of games for the Bulldogs this year, really starting to find his feet in a defence that has been hit hard in the last couple of weeks with injury. So for the Bulldogs to stand up and win this game, it speaks volumes, because they're one of those teams that are still scratching and clawing to stay in the top 8. For Fremantle, the big news obviously with Nat Fyfe with the stress fracture in his foot, so he probably won't even play the rest of the year. I think it's hard to have confidence in Fremantle now, because they play such big games against some big clubs, and then they drop games that they should really be in, and it's hard to gauge where they're at. A club, I feel, out of the, and there's arguably, 7, 8, 9 teams vying for a top 8 spot this year. I think Fremantle is on the lesser end of that mark. I feel they're the team that's most likely going to miss because they're the most inconsistent, if that makes sense, which is so fucking incredibly hard to work out because they've got such an incredible list of players. It's just thankful I didn't change my tip to Fremantle like I anticipated I was going to, because that just would have made my weekend a little bit worse. Gold Coast hosted Collingwood at Heritage Bank Stadium, and this was a game where, even though it was at Heritage Bank, if you did not think Collingwood was going to absolutely fucking destroy the Gold Coast, you were dreaming. And there are some of you that watch my tipping videos religiously that I keep in touch with on Twitter, and I even said it to one of you, and you'll know it. Some of the tweets I was seeing, I can't believe Collingwood are winning by this much. I expected Gold Coast to put up more of a fight. Let's be real here. It's a very young team that have been okay in patches, but are still trying to find consistency against one of the powerhouses of the competition. And there was no way going into this game Collingwood did not win by at least 10 goals. I set the mark. I said it. Collingwood by 10 plus goals. There was a point in time where it looked like Collingwood very well could have and should have won by 100 plus points, and I feel the scoreline is incredibly flattering to the Gold Coast, because I actually don't think they played a good enough brand to finish on 42 points for the game. They played maybe a quarter of decent football, and that is incredibly upsetting for a supporter base that is hopeful for the Gold Coast to play finals this year, and had to endure watching that kind of gameplay go down. On the flip side of things, if you barrack for Collingwood, spiritually or physically, you're sitting on fucking cloud 9 right now, because I've said it since round 1 of this season. Collingwood were always going to push hard for the premiership this year. By round 10, I felt they already had one hand on the Premiership Cup. It's now just a matter of who's going to firm up to take it off them. And I feel the only team at this point in time that I feel is a genuine enough threat managed to fall over the line in the next game, which was Essendon taking on Port Adelaide at the MCG, in a game that saw a kick after the siren by Dan Houston to put it through and win the game by the smallest of margins. Port Adelaide this year, the only club to deny a goal and kick a goal after the siren to determine the outcome of the game, and they have been on the better side of both outcomes. It is fucking incredible. It was a game that at one point Port Adelaide skipped out to a lead that I thought Essendon weren't going to be able to claw back, and then they clawed it back, and then they hit the front, and there was a real liveliness about Essendon, but then Port Adelaide found a way to keep scrapping and scrapping and scrapping, and then that moment after the siren went down. This was a game, however, that Essendon should have put away early, and there is one basis for that fact. No Scott Lycett. And on the surface, that feels like something very minor, but you got to think. Scott Lycett was a very late withdrawal, so much to the point that it was a debutant that took his place, as late as having to get strapped up on the bench during the first quarter because he was unprepared. That is how late they made this call. Playing this rookie, even against somebody like Andrew Phillips, who wouldn't even be, in my opinion, a top 10 ruckman in the competition, Phillips was getting the better of this kid because this kid obviously hasn't had time to mentally or physically prepare for a debut, thrown into the deep end. He looked good in part, but he struggled a lot, and this meant that Jeremy Finlayson, Todd Marshall, Charlie Dixon had to often come out of that forward line to play a ruck role, and that takes a very potent key forward target out of Port Adelaide's forward line. So that is something I feel Essendon failed to capitalise on. That was the winning point. That was where they could have won the game. Very good contest, though. I honestly thought Port Adelaide would win more convincingly. When the rain hit, that really turned the game on its head. I don't think the wet weather suits either team's game style. They're not known for manic moving the ball on pressure, kind of like a Collingwood or a Richmond. So it definitely halted up play for a bit and it looked a little bit sloppy, but Port Adelaide, 13 in a row. Yeah, I feel at the moment, even though Brisbane are beating up teams at the Gabba, I feel Port Adelaide Collingwood is probably the most likely outcome for this year's grand final. And unlike the smacking Port Adelaide copped to Collingwood at the start of the year, I feel it's going to be a good arm wrestle of a grand final if that's the match we get. Hawthorn took on Carlton at the MCG. This was a game that, again, Hawthorn have had some really big upset wins this year. They dismantled Brisbane. They took down St Kilda. So this was a game that I felt, even though I tipped Carlton, they were very much in the hunt for this game. And early on, they were very much in this game. But again, it was that fade out that we have seen all year from Hawthorn more often than not. And Carlton now getting, a lot of confidence back in themselves. Curnow and Mackay starting to get up and about and starting to kick goals, and they've been hammered for their goal kicking all year. The only problem I have with Carlton getting beat up to being back on track is the wins that they have had, I feel, haven't been against opposition that are as noteworthy as some of the bigger names. They beat up the Gold Coast and they've beat up Hawthorn. And the Gold Coast and Hawthorn at the start of this year would have been two teams that would have been predicted to finish in the bottom four. So if they were beating up an Adelaide, a Geelong, a Melbourne, then I feel the conversation for the Blues are back would be one that we could have. They're going to have a really tough run ahead of them. I think Carlton, in the next couple of weeks, they have to play Fremantle and then Collingwood and Port Adelaide. Fremantle's not going to be an easy beat, and then Collingwood and Port, I would assume Collingwood and Port Adelaide both go in as favourites. So very tough 3 weeks for Carlton. If they can get over the line in maybe 2 out of 3 of those games, maybe some belief comes back in. But until then, I think there's still a lot to be desired. And with Hawthorn, I just scratch my head as to what could be, because their best this year has been so incredible to watch. But as I said, more often than not, we're slinking into seeing, them playing very underwhelming football. And I think there'd be a lot of frustrated Hawks fans out there. I really do. TIO Traeger Parks or Melbourne host GWS. I tipped Melbourne. This was my second incorrect tip for the weekend, because with a minute and a half left on the clock, I think it was Josh Kelly, went long bomb. It would have been from 70 plus out. He just hammered a ball long down the line, hoping for the best, hoping for even just a contest in the forward 50, and it bounced and bounced and bounced and went through for a goal, and in the end that was the deciding factor. But another game by Melbourne where they were incredibly inaccurate in front of goal. I think they kicked 14 or 15 behinds. Bailey Fritsch was subbed out, I believe, in the first quarter with an injury, so that's somebody who has been a known goal kicker for Melbourne taken out of the equation. It's tough to get a gauge on Melbourne. Like, a lot of people still have them finishing in the top 4, but they're at a real risk of dropping out of that top 4 now. If Bailey Fritsch ends up sustaining an injury that sees him out for a few weeks, we don't know what's going on with Clayton Oliver, and I feel they're trying to keep him on ice as best as they can, so come finals he's fit and firing, and that's probably the best, course of action for Clayton Oliver. But Melbourne are in a state now where they went from having a top 4 spot almost locked away because they had that gap on other teams, to now really being questionable. And it's hard to believe that, especially they've been touting this combination of Grundy and Gawn as one of the best in the comp, and you would have thought coming into this year this midfield would have been unstoppable, given Grundy and Gawn combined and just the power the pair of them could bring. I feel there has been some games where the combination has fallen incredibly short. And I've actually got a fair few players that have been traded to other clubs this year ahead of Grundy as the best recruit for the year. Dunkley, Isaac Rankin, Tim Taranto, and that's just 3 off the top of my head, but I don't know where Melbourne's at. They are a lot better than the football they've been dishing up some weeks. And I feel they've been a lot more inconsistent this year than what, Melbourne fans would have hoped for. On the flip side, GWS keep their finals chances alive. And I saw a question posed on social media this week. What's most likely to happen first? Gold Coast getting their first run at AFL finals, or GWS returning to finals? And I honestly feel GWS are closer to a final than the Gold Coast are. I thought GWS would struggle this year with no Tim Taranto, no Jacob Hopper, and there have been some instances where that has happened. But they have held their own, and some of these young kids that they have brought in have really stepped up this club to a whole new level. And, you know, this is a club that GWS supporters can be proud of, you know, and they're getting these upset wins, and they're getting, you know, there might be some games where they haven't won, but they've been incredibly close. So they've got a very promising future as a unit, GWS. Whether they make finals or not this year, I don't think they do. But very big win on the weekend, especially against a club like Melbourne. And it's clubs like GWS that can have some real bearing on the fixturing of the top 8, even if they don't make the top 8 themselves. So, yeah, I'm just still left in belief that Melbourne let this one slide. And the final game of the round was West Coast versus St Kilda at Optus Stadium, in a game that for the most part West Coast was in front. I thought I was going to be eating my words, because I said last week West Coast will not win a game for the rest of the year. And they only just continues. West Coast conceded with Owens pouncing for the first. And he has been their best player all year. A lot of the young kids from West Coast stood up tall, and, you know, Ryan Marriage kicking a couple of goals, and Elijah Hewitt kicked a couple of goals. Oscar Allen was plucking some big marks. I feel there were still some passengers on board the West Coast Express, but St Kilda, after a slow start, just found a way after half-time to really get it going. And as somebody who has met Ross Lyon in person, back when he was originally coaching St Kilda before he went to Fremantle, he's a very great bloke to talk to, but when it comes to his coaching, he is not scared to get into those rooms and rip the absolute fucking walls down. And I would have loved to have been a fly on a wall during that halftime address, because I reckon he got stuck into every single one of those fucking Saints boys, and something really ignited. And even though West Coast were able to wrestle some momentum back in that second half, St Kilda at the end of the day were too good, and they managed to pick up the win. Now, the conversation I want to have about this is Adam Simpson for weeks has been saying when West Coast have been belted that they have had to play some young kids before they were ready, and has, I think, very unfairly put the loss on some of these young kids for not living up to the standard. But had West Coast have won this game, the conversation would have then been how well these young kids played and stood up. So that now asks me, where does the blame then land? Because there's been excuses after excuses made for West Coast, but then on the off chance they did win this game, all those excuses would have been swept out the door for at least 1 week, and all these kids that have been getting berated for fucking weeks would have finally gotten some high praise. And I think that is very unjust and unfair, because these kids have been thrown into a situation where, yes, they've had to play probably earlier than they've had to. They've endured some absolute thrashings, but they have still gone out there week in and week out and fucking busted their ass, regardless of how badly they've been beaten. To think that they might have gotten praises only because they might have won a game, I think is a bit ridiculous. And I would have loved to have seen West Coast win this game, even though it probably would have fucked everyone's tips. I don't think anyone would have tipped West Coast this week. But I would have loved to have seen what would have been said had they had won, just to see if the narrative was going to be a little bit fucking different. So obviously with the draw between Sydney and Geelong, everybody gets noted that win, whether they tip Sydney or Geelong. I tipped 7 out of 9. I thought that was a good round. I tipped Richmond thinking they could get the job done, and we got belted, and I tipped Melbourne, who fell short against GWS. So 7 out of 9 is not too bad. We had a surprising amount of people, though, go 8 out of 9, which was the most amount of correct tips in the comp. So this week, congratulations needs to be paid to Team Wiggles, Vincey Boy, Benny Craig, Brighton 75, Some Cripple, The Blooper Reel, Saintly 12, O'Eary, I hope I said that right, 891, Welsh Duke, Magpie Army 2016, Matt Lamb 24, Nado, Rockstar Pool 69, Lizard Boy, Gramercy Riff 78, Macca 0303, and Maj Tiges 77. Congratulations to every single one of you for topping the leaderboard this week for most correct tips. As for the leaderboard itself, ladies and gentlemen, we turn our attention to total tips. We still have a two-way tie. Rockstar Pool 69 is still sitting in first position, in front by total margin, and we have Saintly 12 in second place, tied on 94 total tips. Following that, we have a two-way tie between Macca0303 and Benny Craig on 93 tips each. We then have a three-way tie for third place with Eagles Macon, Maj Tig 77 and Team Wiggles. For fourth place, we have a three-way tie, Frio 90, Vincey Boy and Matt Lamb 24. And then fifth place, in 11th position, we have me on 90. I am 4 tips behind. I said I wanted to break into the top 10. I've been sitting in the top 10 for a couple of weeks. I've dropped out this week. I'm hoping for a top 3 finish, and I'm only 3 tips behind out of that kind of conversation. So hopefully round 17 is a little bit more fruitful to me. This weekend's action kicks off on Thursday night at the MCG with Richmond taking on Sydney, and I am backing my boys in to beat Sydney at the MCG. I think the big turning point for Sydney beating us earlier in the year was the fact that Tom McCartan and Paddy McCartan really got off the chain defensively to help set up their work. I feel defensively Sydney have gotten a lot weaker, and I feel Richmond can capitalise on that, especially given the fact that after weeks of petitioning to see 2 particular Richmond Tiger Cubs debut, they have been named. Jacob Bauer and Sam Banks will finally be getting game time for Richmond, and I am so fucking excited. I've wanted to see both of these kids play at senior level since they got picked up by the club, and Bauer was a mid-season draft pick from last season. So Bauer this year, if you're unaware, 2 goals after the siren against GWS and Brisbane to win the game, and he has been playing predominantly this season as a defender. This past weekend against Brisbane's VFL team, we needed something up forward. We were down, we were almost out. Jacob Bauer, after playing 3 quarters in defence, went forward, kicked 3 goals, including the match winner after the siren. Sam Banks has been racking up touches, kicking goals. He is a very lively player. He has been on Richmond's emergency list for games for, I think, about 6 or 7 weeks now. He has been on the cusp for so long, and he's finally going to get the opportunity. I don't know whether Lance Franklin comes back this week or not. It looks like he might very well do so, but I think Prestia comes back in, Dustin Martin comes back in. We'll miss Jaden Short for the medium term with a hamstring injury, which is upsetting, but we'll deal with it. But I think, Dusty coming in, Prestia coming in, Bauer and Banks getting, a chance at the level. I think Richmond are primed to bounce back after a bad loss away, coming back to the MCG, getting back to our roots, playing some Richmond footy, getting the job done, and I think we're going to do so by 19 points. Friday night at Marvel, Bulldogs Collingwood. Gonna back Collingwood here, but I'm not liking the Marvel Stadium factor because the Bulldogs love playing at Marvel and they can do some damage there. I think Collingwood is just playing too good of a brand of football to be beaten currently. I don't know who can beat them. I honestly think at this point maybe Port Adelaide are the only legitimate team to beat them. But if there's an upset brewing, Western Bulldogs at Marvel doesn't sound like too bad of a tip. But I just think Collingwood are too well primed to not win this game. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, Jordan De Goey comes back this week, maybe, if not next week. But he'll be biting at the bit to get back into the team as well. The Gabba. It's going to be a fucking bloodbath. Brisbane versus West Coast. There was already bets after Sydney kicked 200 plus points as to Brisbane winning by 100 plus, and I think it's only paying $1.06. We saw what Brisbane did to Richmond, and Richmond put up a little bit of a fight, but not much. This is going to get fucking ugly. Oh fuck! If you're a West Coast Eagles fan, I'm fucking sorry about what's going to happen to you this weekend. Giant Stadium, GWS Hawthorn. I'm backing GWS, but again, Hawthorn have done things this year that they shouldn't really have been able to do. So, do they get over the line? I don't think so, but can they push GWS to their limits? I think they can. Marvel Stadium, St Kilda, Melbourne. I think Melbourne win this one. But again, Marvel Stadium, St Kilda like to play at Marvel. So You know, does Melbourne coming off of a late, loss to GWS in an inaccurate game in front of goal rue them, or do they rise to the occasion? Whereas St Kilda, do they rue the fact that West Coast almost beat them, or do they bounce back and have a convincing win at home? Could very well be one of the games to watch for the weekend, but I think Melbourne are just too strong. Port Adelaide taking on the Gold Coast at Adelaide Oval. Port Adelaide make it 14 in a row. I don't think Gold Coast can push them. I mean, if Gold Coast couldn't push Collingwood on a ground where Gold Coast had home ground advantage, I don't think they do it in Adelaide against Port Adelaide. GMHBA, Geelong taking on North Melbourne. They get Jeremy Cameron back in the lineup this week. This is going to be a very big percentage boosting win for Geelong, who are still in contention for the top 8. So they're coming against North Melbourne at the right time of the year. Essendon Adelaide, a lot on the line for these two teams, because both of these teams are in the mix, to go ahead in the top 8 as opposed to just getting into it. It's at Marvel, which you would argue would suit Essendon better, but I'm liking Adelaide here. I think a lot of people discredit Adelaide on the road, but I think they've got the team to get the damage done here against the Bombers. And the final game of the round, Fremantle Carlton at Optus Stadium. I feel Fremantle win this game here. I just think around the ground they're more damaging. They've got, the midfield battle is a very weird one. I think Carlton win the midfield battle, but I think the ruck stock of Darcy and Jackson might be too much for them to quell. Defensively, they're going to be able to shut down Mackay and Curnow because they've got the units to do so. And then when they move the ball forward, I think Fremantle's forward line might be too speedy for Carlton's defence to lock down. So I'm going to roll the dice here, and I'm going to say Fremantle at home get over with a win. So my tips this weekend, we're going with Richmond, Collingwood, Brisbane, GWS, Melbourne, Port Adelaide, Geelong, Adelaide, and Fremantle. Thank you for joining me for another video. Hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, please do me a favour and hit that like button down below. Be sure to subscribe if you're new as well. It would mean a lot to me if you did. And hopefully this weekend is fruitful to you with your tips. But that's it from me, guys. I'm out of here. Good luck to your teams this weekend. And as always, I will catch you guys next time.